my one and only high level goal on this thing was to just try and make it feel and look unique and unfamiliar, right?
Mm. I'm joined today by Jeff Spoonhower, who is part of Resonator, and they are currently kickstarting Anew, the Distant Light. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us for a little bit, Jeff.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me, Jacob.
Of course. So to start things off, why don't you give us a pitch for Anew for people that haven't heard about it?
Sure. So, Anew the Distant Light is it's an indie game that's being made by myself and my development partner Steve Copeland. So we are a two-person shop. We are former AAA developers. So we've been working in games for I've been working in games for 15 years, and Steve's been working for 17 years. So we worked on a lot of pretty big titles in like the BioShock series and Borderlands, Command and Conquer, Lord of the Rings, stuff like that. And we decided to split off and start working on our own project together. And we've been doing it full time for a couple years now. And the game itself is it's an action exploration sci-fi game. So Metroidvania, right? That's the word that a lot of gamers understand. So that's sort of a quick way to sum it up. So the game itself has a lot of those sort of traditional time-tested gameplay mechanics of big open world. You sort of are exploring through it and finding gear, new weapons, and new abilities that allow you to sort of progress through parts of the world that were previously inaccessible, right? We're doing a couple things differently with the gameplay. We have something that's not typical to this genre. So we have a real-time day-night cycle, which affects gameplay, which is going to be cool. So you're on this very mysterious alien moon, and this day and night cycle is always going all the time in real time in the game. So there's this huge sun that gets really close to the surface of the moon you're on. It gets really hot. So when you're above ground and it's really hot and your suit hasn't been upgraded, you start to take damage. So you need to kind of get below ground and explore until the sun goes away. So, and then likewise at night, it gets really cold and you have sort of different creatures that come out. So the day-night cycle affects gameplay. And then we have all sorts of pilotable vehicles in the game. So we have like these huge mechs. We're going to have shuttles and all sorts of other things that we haven't really talked about yet, to sort of just expand on that, on the typical type of gameplay you'd play, which is normally just on foot as the player. So you can kind of hop in and out of these huge machines and drive them around and shoot stuff and stomp on enemies and then hop out to open up doors and get back in, stuff like that. So that's on the gameplay front. The setup for the story basically is something terrible's happened on Earth, and you are a little baby and you're loaded onto a rocket ship and you are launched on this 20 light year journey to this alien moon. So you wake up as an adolescent. Your whole life has been spent on this ship. And that's sort of the setup. And you land, and sort of the mystery of the game is to find out who you are. You've traveled with someone too, so your co-pilot is missing. So you're sort of also there to find out what happened to him. So there's a couple layers to the story that we're going to be telling.
Very cool. So you touched on the first thing I wanted to pick your brain about, which is the Metroidvania style of game that you're creating.
Right.
Specifically, I wanted to find out what kind of challenges that presents from a design standpoint. Where you've got a gameplay where there's lots of gaps that you can't cross until you unlock a certain thing. Is that something that you design with from the beginning, or do you kind of create the world and then find the locks that need to be opened?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really challenging design issue that we have to work through, and it's not like you're going from World 1.1 to World 1.2 to World 1.3, and everything's very linear, right? Which sort of simplifies the design. So yeah, it's really not. It's not like a cut and dry process where we have everything perfectly laid out on a map and then we just go in and start building the levels, or the zones, what we call them. There's a lot of back and forth between myself and Steve. And Steve Copeland is the game director and the programmer, and I'm doing all the art, animation, sound, story. So what we kind of do, our process has been is we sort of plan things out on paper, like on a Google spreadsheet, and say, okay, this is the zone we're going to build. Okay, we know we want these story beats to happen. We know generally like this is the visual look and feel of the level. How do we start placing sort of the weapons and the items in the right spots, and place the lock and key mechanisms? Like there's a door here, but we know we don't want the player to just be able to get through it. They need to have like, the wall climb or whatever to climb up to get to it. There's it's a very fluid process basically of like doing it on paper and then very roughly laying out the levels in Unity without any like art or anything pretty, right? It's really sort of nasty temporary stuff. And then we just sort of play and iterate on it until we get to the point where it feels like it makes sense flow-wise. And that's it just in the zone itself. But then there's the macro, like the entire world of all the zones put together. And that's something that is an ongoing thing that we're constantly working on as we build each individual zone.
Right.
If that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting insight. So moving to something that's more directly what you're in control of is the aesthetics of this game, and it really jumped out at me when looking at the Kickstarter campaign. They've got an incredibly unique feel that feels very alien. How did you go about creating visuals that kind of at times feel unsettling because they feel a little foreign to what we know? What was that process like? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to hear you say that because I'm the art team, so it's basically just me. And right from the beginning, my one and only high level goal on this thing was to just try and make it feel and look unique and unfamiliar, right? Not like a sci-fi game where it's kind of, we're familiar with the look. There's sort of these tropes of design with science fiction, right?
Sure.
So that was my goal and continues to be my goal that I'm always working really hard and trying to be conscious of, is like to make it look and feel weird. So hopefully we're headed in the right direction there.
I think you are.
My process, the way that it looks is sort of the way that I see the world in my mind. So the challenge for me is to always try and just get it out in the game in the way that the tone that I sort of feel inside of myself, which is very, very unfamiliar and alien. So one of the challenges for me is to always sort of try and steer away from designing the terrain and the lighting and the characters in a way that feels like rational and familiar. And it's a challenge because like part of me is getting pulled in that direction of make it look like everything else. And I'm always trying to get myself to go in the direction of no, make it weird and something that people haven't seen. And to do that, one thing that sort of helps me stay on track is I look at a lot of surrealist artwork, like surrealist paintings, and some really great concept art that I find just like online on message boards of these really talented artists. And I try and just keep that artwork on my second monitor when I'm designing, so I can just sort of look at it and say, that's the tone that I want to shoot for, right? So it's when I look at like Salvador Dali and Magritte and sort of painters, classical surrealist painters, I try to let their work sort of influence what I'm doing design-wise with the game.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Finally, before talking a little bit about your background as an independent developer, what has the Kickstarter experience been like so far? What have you seen be really successful, and what have you seen that you might want to tweak?
Right. Yeah, Kickstarters are really, really tough now to pull off. And we planned for a long time for this Kickstarter. We did a lot of, over a year of research on and off, looking at other indie games that were successful on Kickstarter and other games that were not successful. And we tried to basically pull the best and worst from the worst things to try and avoid and the things that we thought worked well with other people's campaigns. As far as rewards and tier levels, and it's extremely complicated, and there's this whole psychology of backing projects. So we tried to do the best we could on that front, and it takes a long time to get ready. And then I worked probably 2 or 3 months full time just on actually building the campaign before we launched it. So things that we think are going well is we think the campaign itself looks really good and professional. Um, Things that are really tough to do are to get people to look at it. As simple as that sounds, there's just so much competition in the indie game space. It's just oversaturated as far as just the number of games that are being made. And, I think on Kickstarter right now, there's like 140 games trying to make money. And, fortunately, Kickstarter labeled this as like a project they love, which is awesome. And it helps us to sort of rise to the top of the page. But the ongoing struggle is getting the larger press sites to talk about us. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten a whole lot of big, like IGN level coverage.
Sure.
Because they don't, until you've become big, they don't care generally, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're not going to cover you unless you're huge and awesome. But to get huge and awesome, you need to get that type of coverage.
Sure.
So it's a catch-22. So we're just continuing to work every single day during the campaign on outreach and trying to just on Twitter, on finding editors and just trying to get our stuff in front of them. So they'll just be like, hey, to their audience, you guys should check this out. This looks really cool. So that's kind of where we are now. Funding is going pretty well. But we're just working hard to get people in front of the campaign page.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can help spread the word a little bit about this project.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Moving from talking about Anew to you kind of already touched on some of your background as a developer of games in the AAA sector. So, what made you move towards doing independent development?
Yeah, that's also a good question. You working on AAA games in big studios is a lot of fun and it's a lot of work. And the thing is after you do it for 10 or 15 years, it's a pretty tough job. Like you have to work a lot of long hours. There's a lot of stress involved with deadlines. And the thing is you're always on these big games. You're always working on someone else's vision, right? You have these few high-level people in the studios who are calling the shots as far as what is the game we're going to make, what's the commercial potential, what is the look of the game going to be like. And there's 2 or 3 people who make those decisions, and all the work sort of trickles down to the 150 people, working in production.
Right.
So, after you work on 10 or 15 games or whatever, I just got to the point where I thought, I have some of my own ideas, and Steve had some of his own ideas, and we just said, are we willing to take the significant risk of doing independent development, and just to give it a go, and that's pretty much it. I had great experiences at the studios. It was just kind of like, we have ideas and we want to see if we can make it work with a small team.
Sure. So what were some games, either nostalgically or more recently, that have been an influence for you, both
right.
with Anew and as a developer in general?
Sure. Steve and I have some crossover in our tastes of games, in games, which is good for this project. But we also sort of both like other different types of things. So I think that's actually helpful because it sort of brings a wider perspective to what we're doing in the game. Like I try to get the stuff in that I like, and he tries to get the stuff in that he likes, and we sort of jam it together.
Sure.
As far as games that I love and have influenced me, Red Dead Redemption is one of my favorite games of all time, because the world, we're not making that type of game, but the world in Red Dead felt so real and so realized as far as the cohesiveness of the design and the look and feel of just moving around in the world. It felt so organic, and I try to make our game feel unified that way, like you're in a real space. Shadow of the Colossus is another one of my favorites, tonally and the way the story is told, sort of very mysteriously. No text, no voiceover, right. It's all done visually and with music. And then another huge influence for me was Limbo. Like a lot of people, I think, very popular game, but just that sort of really lonely sort of visual style that makes you feel like you are really in danger, right, in this very strange world. So those are sort of 3 games that I point to. I know Steve is a huge fan of the Metroidvania style, right? So he's Super Metroid, Cave Story, Dark Souls is something that's influenced sort of the pacing of our combat. So it's not like a button masher.
Sure.
You'll go into combat with a robot or a creature, and you have to figure out the cadence of it. So like you can shoot, and then he may attack. So you have to pull your sort of laser shield up, and then so you can't just run into a combat scenario and go crazy and hope to survive.
Awesome.
If that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
To kind of bring this to a close, are there any other indie developers out there or indie games out there currently that you think are doing something really cool or really innovative that you want to particularly shout out, especially if they're ones that people might not have heard of?
Right. It's a little embarrassing, but I don't have very much time to play games anymore.
Sure. With the whole making a game thing.
Not only because of the game I'm making, but I also teach at a university, and I'm married and I have a couple kids, so like my
time is at
my free time is it's actually not that uncommon for game developers because we're so busy working on games for long hours. When we get home, it's just kind of like we just want to get away from computers and stuff. I mean, again, Playdead for me, they're just they're not like an unknown, obviously, but what they're doing, just as far as the entire vision of the world that they're putting together and the tone and the feel of it is just so unique and beautiful. Earlier games that I played several years ago that had a lot of impact on the way that I animate in our game and sort of the way that the enemies sort of respond in combat would be Shank. If you remember the old Shank, they had this really great, it had a very cartoony look. Our game doesn't look exactly like that, but it was more of like the responsiveness of the characters. It was like very snappy the way that the enemies would animate.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Spoonhower, thank you so much for talking to us about Anew. If you are interested in learning more about the game or on checking out the Kickstarter, there will be a link in the description below.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate the support.